I thought hitting rock bottom meant signing the divorce papers, but I was wrong. The real bottom was watching my 10-year-old son shiver in the rain and ask, "Mom, where do we sleep tonight?" My ex-husband stood on the porch, smirking because he believed I was powerless and broke. He had no idea I was clutching a frayed silver card in my pocket. He thought he had evicted me, but he had just started a war he could not afford. My name is Lauren Kessler. I am 38 years old, and until an hour ago, I believed the hardest part of my life was behind me. I had just navigated a divorce from Evan Rourke that we had managed to keep civil for the sake of our children, 10-year-old Noah and 7-year-old Ellie. I was standing in the hallway of the house we had bought together, folding laundry, when the front door burst open. Evan did not knock. He marched in, followed closely by a locksmith in gray coveralls and a man I vaguely recognized as a process server. Evan held a piece of paper against his chest like a shield, his face set in a mask of cold indifference that I had never seen during our 12 years of marriage. "You are violating the agreement," Evan announced, his voice echoing off the hardwood floors. "You need to leave. Right now." I froze, a pair of Noah's jeans in my hands. "What are you talking about? I have the house for 6 more months. It is in the decree." "Not anymore," he said, thrusting the paper at me. "Emergency temporary order. You violated the morality clause. The judge signed it this morning. You are trespassing on my property." Before I could even read the dense legal text, the locksmith was already drilling into the front door handle. The sound was a screeching assault on my senses. I scrambled to gather the kids, grabbing backpacks, coats, and whatever toys were within reach. Evan did not help. He stood by the door, checking his watch as if I were an inconvenienced employee rather than the mother of his children. Minutes later, we were standing on the concrete sidewalk. The door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked into place with a finality that made my stomach turn. It was starting to rain, a cold drizzle that seemed to mock the situation. Evan stood on the porch, looking down at us. "This house belongs to me now," he said, his tone devoid of any emotion. I looked down at the paper he had shoved into my hand. The red stamp from the county clerk looked authentic enough. The signature at the bottom looked familiar, but something about it made my skin crawl. The loops on the letters were slightly off, a little too perfect, as if traced rather than written. It smelled of fraud, but standing there on the street with 2 frightened children, I had no way to prove it. Ellie tugged on the hem of my jacket, her large eyes filled with confusion. "Mom, did we do something bad? Why is Daddy locking us out?" The question tore through me. I knelt down on the wet pavement, ignoring the dampness soaking into my jeans, and pulled her close. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to let them see me cry. "No, sweetie, we did nothing wrong. This is just a big mistake. Daddy is confused, but I am going to fix it." My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. My first instinct was to call my lawyer, but I knew she was out of town for the weekend. Instead, my thumb hovered over a contact I had not called in months, Ruth Kessler, my mother. She had remained frustratingly silent throughout the entire divorce process, offering no advice and taking no sides. She answered on the first ring. "Mom," I managed to say, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "He threw us out. Evan threw us out of the house. He has some court order. We are on the street." I expected her to gasp, to ask questions, or to panic. Instead, her voice came through the lines steady and cold, like steel. "Do not waver. Do not argue at the door," Ruth said. "Get in the car. Go straight to the bank. Briar Hollow Trust. Bring the old card I gave you." "The bank?" I asked, confused. "Mom, it is 5 o'clock. And what card I don't—" "Check your messages," she interrupted. I pulled the phone away from my ear. A photo appeared on my screen. It was an image of a silver card, battered and worn at the corners. It bore the logo of a bank that had been bought out almost 2 decades ago. "That card is in the old briefcase I gave you years ago," Ruth said when I put the phone back to my ear. "The one in your trunk. Take it to the branch manager. Do not explain. Just put it on the desk." I stared at the phone. I thought she was losing her mind. A 20-year-old debit card. But then I looked up at the house. Evan was leaning against his luxury sedan in the driveway, texting someone. He looked up, met my gaze, and smirked. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. A man who thought he had stripped me of my home, my money, and my dignity. He thought I was broken. I walked to my car and popped the trunk. My fingers brushed against the worn leather of the old briefcase my mother had given me when I graduated college. I found the hidden pocket. The card was there, cold and heavy in my hand. I looked back at Evan one last time. If he wanted a war, he had picked the wrong day, and he had definitely picked the wrong family. I slammed the trunk shut. I was not going to a shelter. I was going to the bank. I drove to my friend Sarah's house in a daze, the windshield wipers slicing through the rain like a metronome counting down the seconds of my old life. Sarah took the kids without a word, setting up a makeshift bed in her living room while I sat at her kitchen island. I did not cry. I did not vent. I opened my laptop. I treated the screen like an operating table. I pulled up every bank statement, every joint account, and every credit report I could access. If Evan wanted to claim I had violated a financial agreement, I needed to see the battlefield clearly. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft breathing of my children in the next room. I started scanning the joint checking account we had supposedly closed out last week. My eyes caught a transaction date from 21 days ago. It was a small debit, just $250, labeled simply as admin fee, BHT. BHT. I whispered to the empty kitchen. I cross-referenced the merchant code. It stood for Briar Hollow Trust, a local regional bank. My stomach tightened. In our divorce settlement, specifically in the financial disclosure affidavit Evan had signed under penalty of perjury, he had sworn he had no new debts and no other active accounts. He had looked me in the eye in the mediator's office and said he was completely transparent. But this fee was dated 3 weeks before we signed the final papers. He had been setting something up while we were still discussing custody schedules. I dug deeper. I logged into the portal for the children's college savings accounts. I expected to see the usual stagnant balance, but instead, I saw a notification banner at the top of the screen, profile updated. I clicked on the history log. A request had been made to change the primary beneficiary contact information. The confirmation email had been sent to an address that looked like mine at first glance, but as I leaned closer to the screen, I saw the deception. The address was Lauren Kessler, workadgmail.com. I have never used a dash in my name for an email address. I have never owned that account. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I checked the access logs. The bank's security tab showed the IP address of the device that had made the change. It was a static IP from a commercial district downtown. I checked the timestamp. It was 10 in the morning on the 14th of November. I froze. On the 14th of November at 10 in the morning, I was sitting in a courtroom hallway, turning off my phone to meet with the judge. I was physically incapable of logging into anything, but Evan was at his office. That IP address belonged to the building where his company leased the entire 4th floor. The picture was forming, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Evan had not just thrown me out on a whim, he had impersonated me. He had created a fake digital identity to approve changes I never saw, likely agreeing to terms that would frame me for financial misconduct. He was scrubbing the timeline, making it look like I was the one moving money, the one breaking the rules, justifying his emergency order to kick me out. My phone buzzed on the counter, making me jump. It was a text from Noah, sent from under the blankets in the living room. "Mom." "Are you awake?" I heard Dad tell someone on the phone. "It is done," before we left. He sounded happy. I read the message 3 times. My hands went cold. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. Evan was celebrating. He thought he had executed a perfect removal. He thought I was just a tired ex-wife who would be too overwhelmed by homelessness to look at the fine print. I looked at the cursor blinking on my screen. He wanted a victim. I would not give him one. I opened a new document. I did not name it divorce defense or legal notes. I typed 2 words in bold, capital letters at the top of the page, exit plan. Then, I began to reverse engineer his scheme, line by line. I listed the IP address. I screenshotted the fake email. I downloaded the transaction ID for the Briar Hollow trust fee. If he wanted to play with bank fraud, he was about to learn that paper trails burn both ways. The card my mother told me to use was heavy in my pocket. And for the first time that night, I stopped shaking. I sat in the dim light of Sarah's kitchen, staring at my phone. The screen was the only source of light, illuminating the steam rising from a cup of tea I had not touched. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear the lie directly from the source. I dialed Evan's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Lauren, I hope you are not calling to cause a scene. The kids need sleep." I did not scream. I did not cry. I gripped the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white, but my voice remained steady. "Where did you get that order?" "Evan, the court does not issue evictions at 5 in the afternoon on a Friday." He sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Lauren, look at yourself. You are unstable. You have been erratic for weeks. I had to file an emergency motion. I am protecting the children from your current state." It was a script. He was speaking as if an audience were listening, painting a picture of a hysterical woman that did not exist. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to scream insults so he could record them and play them for a judge later. "I am perfectly stable," I said, my tone flat, "and I want to see the filing. Send the scan to my lawyer." "There is no need for that tonight." He replied quickly, "You know why this is happening. You know what you tried to do with the joint assets." Mr. Hale was very clear about the suspicious activity. I frowned. "Who is Mr. Hale?" There was a pause on the line, a beat of silence where I could almost hear his brain recalibrating. "The bank representative?" Evan said, his voice losing a fraction of its smoothness. "The one who flagged your transfer? Don't change the subject. Just stay away from the house until the hearing." He hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. "Mr. Hale." I had never spoken to anyone named Hale. I had never authorized a transfer. Evan had slipped. He had mentioned a specific player in a game I was not supposed to know the rules of yet. I turned back to my laptop. I pulled up the digital copy of our divorce decree, the final PDF that had been emailed to me 2 days ago. I scrolled past the custody schedules, past the asset division, down to the very end of the document. There, buried on page 42, was an addendum I did not recognize, Temporary Residence Rights and Asset Preservation Protocol. It stated that if either party was flagged for financial irregularity, the other party was granted immediate, exclusive possession of the marital home. It was a trap clause, specific and lethal. And at the bottom of the page was my signature. I zoomed in. The blue ink looked like my handwriting. It spelled my name, but as I stared at the capital L in Lauren, my breath hitched. I have a lazy hand. When I write a cursive L, the bottom loop is always wide, almost flat. The L on the screen was sharp, vertical, and pinched. It was the way someone would trace my signature if they were trying too hard to be precise. It lacked the natural flow of my muscle memory. Then I remembered, 3 weeks ago, in the chaotic lobby of the mediator's office. Evan's lawyer, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes, had shoved an iPad into my hands as we were leaving. "Just one more initialized page. Lauren," he had said, checking his watch. "The court clerk closes in 10 minutes. We need this to file today or we are delayed another month." I had been exhausted. I had been carrying a sleeping Ellie on my shoulder. I had signed on the glass screen with my finger, barely reading the header, just wanting it to be over. They had inserted the addendum digitally, and I had handed them the weapon they used to shoot me. Evan had not beaten me because he was smarter. He had beaten me because he knew I was tired. He had weaponized my exhaustion and my desire for a peaceful resolution. I closed the laptop with a snap. My hands were no longer shaking. Anger, cold and clarifying, settled in my chest. I picked up my phone and typed a message to my mother. I am heading to Briar Hollow Trust. Her reply came 3 seconds later. Go straight to the VIP counter. Put the card on the desk. Do not say a word until they look at it. I grabbed my coat. I was done being the tired ex-wife. I was done being the victim. Evan had mentioned Mr. Hale. I decided it was time to go and introduce myself. Saturday morning found me sitting across a glass desk from Paige Hartman. I had fired my previous attorney by voicemail at dawn. Paige was different. She did not handle amicable separations. She handled financial warfare. She flipped through the stack of printouts I had assembled, her eyes scanning the IP logs and the digital signature on the addendum. We do not file a complaint yet, Paige said, her voice low and sharp. If we file now, he hides the money. He shreds the digital trail. We need a moment where they cannot deny the truth. We need a trap. First, we secured the children. Paige filed an emergency motion for status quo custody. It was a procedural move, not a dramatic one, simply ensuring that Evan could not use the police to drag Noah and Ellie out of Sarah's house. It bought us 48 hours of safety. Then, Paige pointed a manicured finger at the distorted signature on the addendum. If he slipped a digital layer into the document after you signed, or if he used a saved signature from another file, that is tampering with court evidence. That is a felony, but proving it requires the original metadata. We needed the bank to corroborate the timeline. I had sent an email to Briar Hollow Trust at 8 in the morning requesting a disclosure statement for the loan associated with the file fee. Their response had arrived 10 minutes later. Cold and automated request denied. Client confidentiality protocols. Account is not in your name. Paige read the rejection and smiled. It was a terrifying expression. They are hiding behind privacy laws, so we do not ask for the loan files. We make them open the files themselves. I spent the next hour assembling a physical dossier. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was a weapon. I included the bank statements showing the fee, the IP logs tracing the changes to Evan's office, and the magnified image of the forged signature. And in a separate, small, white envelope, I placed the card my mother had given me. It looked unassuming, a piece of silver plastic with frayed edges, but it felt heavier than the rest of the file combined. I called the bank and requested an appointment. I did not ask for the loan officer. I asked to speak to the branch manager regarding suspicious beneficiary changes on a minor's trust account. Compliance regulations required them to take immediate meetings for issues involving children's funds. They scheduled me for 11 o'clock. I was standing outside the heavy glass doors of Briar Hollow Trust, smoothing the lapel of my blazer, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. If you are good and stop making scenes, I might let you see the kids this weekend. I stared at the screen. He was delusional. He assumed that because he had the house, he possessed the children. He was trying to bait me, to make me beg, to make me text back something angry that he could use to prove I was unstable. He wanted the satisfaction of my desperation. I did not reply. I slid the phone into my pocket and touched the white envelope to ensure it was still there. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold city air. When I exhaled, the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, prosecutorial focus. I pushed open the doors of the bank. I did not walk in like a woman who had been thrown out of her home the night before. I walked in like a woman who was about to close the steel jaws of a trap. The interior of Briar Hollow Trust was designed to intimidate. The floors were polished marble that clicked sharply under my heels, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and ozone. It was a hushed sanctuary where people spoke in low murmurs, the kind of place built to make you feel small so you would not ask where the money actually went. I sat in a glass-walled office watching the branch manager, Marcus Hale, settle into his leather chair. He was the man Evan had accidentally named on the phone. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with a suit that was tailored a little too tightly and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He looked at me with a mix of professional courtesy and barely concealed annoyance, like I was a stain on his pristine desk. "Ms. Kessler," Marcus said, clasping his hands together on the blotter. "I squeezed you in because you mentioned a security issue with a miner's account. However, I must warn you that our privacy policies are extremely strict." I did not offer a pleasantry. I did not smile back. I simply placed my folder on the glass surface between us. "I am not here for policy lectures," I said, my voice steady. "I need to confirm who authorized a beneficiary change on the savings account held in the name of Noah Rourke." "A minor." Marcus glanced at the folder but did not open it. He offered a condescending tilt of his head. "As I told you on the phone, if the account is not primarily in your name, we cannot discuss the transaction history. You would need the primary account holder present." "The primary account holder is 10 years old," I replied. "Then his guardian," Marcus countered smoothly, "which, according to the notes on the file, is your ex-husband at the moment." He knew too much. He knew about the custody situation that had only happened 18 hours ago. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed a number, and set it on the desk on speaker mode. "Paige, you are on with Mr. Hale." Paige Hartman's voice cut through the quiet room, crisp and lethal. "Mr. Hale, this is Paige Hartman, legal counsel for Ms. Kessler. Under federal banking regulations regarding custodial accounts for minors, any legal guardian has the right to view the audit trail of beneficiary modifications to prevent fraud. Refusal to comply is a violation of the Banking Secrecy Act." Marcus stiffened. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. He leaned forward, ignoring the phone and lowering his voice to a tone that was meant to be intimate and soothing. "Lauren." "Can I call you Lauren?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Look, I know you are going through a messy divorce. Evan, Mr. Rourke mentioned that things have been very high stress for you. He told me you might be confused about the finances." My blood ran cold. There it was. Evan had prepped him. He had painted the narrative before I even walked through the door. Marcus was not just a banker. He was an accomplice who thought he was dealing with a hysterical woman. "I understand you are emotional," Marcus continued, his tone bordering on pity. "But coming here and making demands based on paranoia is not going to help you get your house back." He thought he had silenced me. He sat back, looking satisfied, waiting for me to cry or yell so he could call security. I stared at him for a long moment. The silence in the small glass room grew heavy. Then, slowly, I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I did not take out a tissue. I took out the white envelope. I slid the silver card out and placed it on the desk. It made a sharp click against the glass. It was scratched, the edges worn white. The logo faded from a bank that had ceased to exist 20 years ago. "I am not confused. Mr. Hale," I said quietly, "and I am not asking for a favor. I want to exercise the verification rights assigned to this access code." Marcus looked down. He looked bored at first, expecting a credit card or a license, but then his eyes focused on the embossed numbers on the silver plastic. He blinked. He blinked again. Rapidly. The condescending smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of genuine confusion that quickly bled into fear. His lips pressed into a thin, white line. He looked from the card to me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He did not see a tired housewife anymore. He saw a ghost. Where? He started, his voice cracking. Where did you get this run the code? I said. Marcus stood up so abruptly, his chair hit the wall behind him. Please, excuse me for a moment. I need to check something in the secure archive. He grabbed the card, his hand trembling slightly, and walked out of the office. He did not go to the teller line. He went straight to the heavy steel door at the back of the branch, keyed in a code, and disappeared inside. I heard the distinct sound of a heavy lock engaging. I sat alone in the glass box. The silence was no longer intimidating. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a trap that had just been sprung. 5 minutes later, the heavy steel door opened. Marcus walked back into the glass office, but the swagger was gone. His face was the color of old parchment. He did not sit down. He stood behind his desk, holding the silver card with 2 hands as if it were a radioactive isotope. Ms. Kessler, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Ruth Kessler. Who is she to you? I looked him in the eye. She is my mother. Marcus swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob nervously. He did not say another word to me. Instead, he pressed the intercom button on his desk. Send Mr. Vance in. Now. It is a code-red legacy protocol. A moment later, a gray-haired man in a dark suit entered the room. He was not a teller or a loan officer. He carried the distinct, heavy aura of a miserable internal compliance advisor. Marcus handed him the card. Mr. Vance looked at the worn plastic, then at me, and finally at the computer screen Marcus had unlocked. I assume you know what this is, Mr. Vance said, his tone devoid of the customer service warmth Marcus had tried to fake earlier. This is a legacy access card. We have not issued these in 15 years. They were given to the lead forensic auditors who oversaw the merger transition. It overrides standard privacy blocks for historical tracing. I felt a jolt of shock. My mother had never told me she was a forensic auditor. I knew she had worked in banking, but she had always described her job as checking paperwork. I realized then that Ruth had not just been checking papers, she had been hunting thieves, and she had given me her badge. I am using the access, I said, leaning forward. Open the audit trail on the loan associated with the file fee on my joint account. Mr. Vance typed a long string of passwords. The screen flickered, and a complex web of transactions appeared. It was not just a simple fee. It was a link to a secured loan file that had been hidden from the main dashboard. Here it is, Mr. Vance muttered, adjusting his glasses. A bridge loan, $350,000, secured against the equity of the property at 42 Oak Ridge Drive. My house, the house Evan had just kicked me out of. Who is the borrower? I asked. Marcus turned the screen toward me. The borrower was not Evan Rourke. It was a corporate entity listed as Rourke Solutions LLC. I stared at the name. I have never heard of that company. It is a shell, Mr. Vance said, tapping the screen. Look at the guarantor. Evan Rourke. And the co-guarantor. He scrolled down. There was my name. Lauren Kessler. Next to it was a digital signature time-stamped for November 14th. I did not sign that, I said, my voice cold. Check the metadata. Mr. Vance clicked on the signature line to expand the properties. Signed via DocuSign. IP address maps to a mobile device, model number iPhone 15 Pro Max. I pulled my phone out of my bag and laid it on the desk. I have an iPhone 13. I have never owned a Pro Max. And on November 14th, I was in a courtroom with no reception. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a roaring engine in the quiet. Marcus looked at the screen, then at my phone, and finally at Mr. Vance. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had authorized a loan based on a fraudulent signature. secured by a house that was currently the subject of a litigious divorce, to a shell company designed to siphon equity away from the marital estate. Marcus looked at me, and his hands began to shake again. Ms. Kessler, if this signature is not yours, if the device ID does not match, then we are sitting on a mandatory reporting scenario. This is bank fraud. He looked terrified. He knew that with my mother's card on the table, this inquiry was already logged in the permanent system. He could not delete it. He could not hide it. I sat back in the chair, crossing my arms. Good, I said, my voice cutting through the fear in the room. Because I want the truth reported. Right now. The glass door of the office swung open, and Evan Rourke walked in. He did not look like a man who had just been caught in a lie. He looked like a concerned husband arriving to manage a crisis. He wore his favorite navy suit, the one he wore to parent-teacher conferences to charm the staff, and his face was arranged in a mask of patient exhaustion. "Lauren," Evan said, his voice soft and dripping with fake concern. "What are you doing here? I told you to go rest. Please, don't cause trouble in front of strangers. You are embarrassing yourself." He moved to stand beside my chair, placing a hand on the back of it as if to shepherd me away. It was a performance designed for an audience of one Marcus Hale. Evan was betting that social pressure would make me fold. He thought I would be too ashamed to argue in a bank. I did not move. I did not scream. I did not even look at his hand. I turned my head slowly and looked him dead in the eyes. "Answer the question." "Evan," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. "Did you sign a bridge loan using the house as collateral?" Evan chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. He looked at Marcus and offered a conspiratorial shrug. "I am sorry about this. Marcus, she is very confused about the divorce settlement. This is just standard financial restructuring. I am securing liquidity for the children's future education." "Restructuring," I repeated flatly. "It is for the kids." "Lauren," Evan said, turning his charm back to me. "I am trying to make sure Noah and Ellie have stability while you sort yourself out." Paige's voice cracked like a whip from the speakerphone on the desk. "Mr. Rourke, this is Paige Hartman. We have the metadata for the loan documents. Can you confirm for the record that you own an iPhone 15 Pro Max and that you were physically present at the listed IP address on November 14th? Evan stiffened, his rhythm faltered. He looked at the phone, then at me, his eyes narrowing. The good father mask slipped, revealing the arrogance underneath. "I do not answer to you." Evan snapped at the phone. "This is harassment. Lauren is using you to enact some petty revenge because she is bitter about the custody order." "We did not mention the terms," Marcus interrupted. His voice was no longer friendly. He was looking at Evan with the cold, calculating gaze of a man watching a liability unfold. "We have not discussed the loan details with Ms. Kessler yet." Evan waved a hand dismissively. "It does not matter. The rate is locked at 6.5%. Which is excellent in this market. I am saving the estate money. If you cancel it now, the penalties will eat up the equity." The room went silent. I had not mentioned the interest rate. Paige had not mentioned the interest rate. The documents on the screen were facing Mr. Vance, not Evan. Marcus stared at Evan. "Mr. Rourke, I did not tell you the rate was 6.5%. That figure is only in the internal approval file, the one generated yesterday." Evan froze. He realized too late that he had just proven he had access to information he should not have known, confirming he was the one pulling the strings. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You needed that cash to pay off your gambling debts, didn't you? You figured you would strip the equity, kick me out, and use the loan to float your lifestyle while you pretended to be the victim." Evan blinked. It was a slow, deliberate blink, the kind that happens when a brain completely shorts out. "Mr. Rourke," Marcus said, standing up, "I need you to wait in the lobby. We have some compliance protocols to review." Evan did not move toward the lobby. Instead, he stepped closer to me, blocking Marcus's view with his body. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his voice dropping to a whisper that was venomous and terrifying. "You think you are clever," he hissed, the smell of his mints washing over me. "You are going to ruin everything. Do you want Noah and Ellie to end up on the street? Do you want them to hate you for destroying their father? If you don't stop this, I will make sure they never speak to you again." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did not flinch. I had spent years afraid of his anger, afraid of his disappointment. But as I looked at him now, sweating in his expensive suit, caught in a trap of his own making, I realized he was small. I stood up, forcing him to take a step back. I smoothed my blazer and looked him straight in the eye. "You are wrong, Evan," I said, my voice low but perfectly clear. "I am not afraid of losing face, and I am not afraid of poverty. I am only afraid of one thing." "What?" he sneered. "I am afraid that if I don't stop you," I said, "my children will grow up thinking that living like you is acceptable." I turned my back on him and looked at Marcus. "Please continue the report, Mr. Hale." Mr. Vance rotated the monitor so I could see the raw data of the electronic signature log. The screen displayed a list of authentication factors used to verify the fraudulent loan documents. There was the fake email address I had already identified, but below it lay a secondary verification method, a mobile number listed for two-factor authentication. "Do you recognize this number ending in 8892? Mr. Vance asked. I stared at the digits. The room seemed to tilt. I did not need to check my contacts list because I had dialed that number just 2 nights ago. It belonged to Tessa Wynne. Tessa was supposed to be my friend. She was the one who had come over with a bottle of wine the night Evan served me the divorce papers. She was the one who had held my hand while I cried about losing the house. "That is Tessa Wynne," I whispered, the betrayal tasting like copper in my mouth. "She used to work as an administrative assistant at Evan's firm." The pieces clicked together with terrifying precision. I remembered a specific afternoon 2 weeks ago. I had been overwhelmed with paperwork, and Tessa had dropped by. She had offered to take a stack of financial affidavits to scan them at her office to save me the trip. I had thanked her. I had handed her the keys to my identity, and she had driven them straight to Evan. "Check the geolocation of the IP address," I said, my voice hardening. Mr. Vance typed a command. The signal originated from a public network at a location called The Hive. "That is a co-working space downtown," I said. "Tessa checks in there on social media every morning." "Paige," I said to the speakerphone, "did you get that? I am already typing the subpoena for their security camera footage." Paige replied, her voice sharp with adrenaline. "If Tessa and Evan walked into that print room together on the day of the signing, we have conspiracy to commit fraud." Evan, who had been pacing near the door, let out a scoff of disbelief. "This is insane. Tessa is just a friend. You are spinning a conspiracy theory because you cannot accept that you are broke. I was just trying to help the family, and you are dragging innocent people into your mess." He was still acting. He truly believed that if he denied it with enough confidence, the bank would simply ignore the data on the screen. Then the glass door opened again. This time, it was not a banker. It was my mother, Ruth Kessler. She did not look like the quiet grandmother who knit sweaters for the kids. She wore a trench coat that looked like armor, and she carried a leather briefcase that I had not seen since I was a child. She walked into the room with a stride that commanded immediate silence. She did not look at me. She did not look at Evan. She walked straight to the desk and looked down at Marcus Hale. Marcus looked as if he wanted to crawl under his desk. "Mrs. Kessler," Marcus stammered. I was just—" "Save it," Ruth said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the air heavy. "I know how this system works. Marcus, I wrote the compliance protocols for this branch 20 years ago. If you attempt to hide—" alter or bury that audit trail. You will not just lose your job, you will go to federal prison alongside them." The room went dead silent. Even Evan stopped pacing. He looked at Ruth with a mixture of confusion and fear. He had always dismissed my mother as a passive, irrelevant figure. "Ruth!" Evan started, trying to regain his footing. "You need to talk sense into your daughter. She is hysterical." Ruth turned to him slowly. She looked at him with eyes that were completely devoid of warmth. "I am not here to talk. Evan, I am here to witness." She turned to me, and for the first time, her expression softened just a fraction. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me go through months of this hell without helping?" Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and grounding, because if I had stepped in too early, he would have just hidden the money better. He would have settled for less and kept the stolen assets. I had to wait until he got greedy. I had to wait until he committed a felony that the bank could not ignore. I stared at her. I had thought she was indifferent. I had thought she was weak. But she had been watching Evan like a hawk, waiting for him to walk into the trap. She had not stayed silent to save the family reputation. She had stayed silent to ensure that when the trap snapped shut, it would cut off his head. "He is exposed now," Ruth said, looking back at the screen where the audit trail glowed in red and black. "And now, we finish it." The security footage from the hive arrived on Paige's tablet with a distinct chime that cut through the tension in the office. We all leaned in to watch the grainy black and white video. It showed Tessa Wynne walking into the frame holding a thick manila envelope, the same kind I used for my legal documents. A moment later, Evan walked into the shot. They entered a glass-walled conference room together. Evan left 3 minutes later, checking his watch, but Tessa stayed behind, logging into a terminal and pulling papers from the envelope. "Look at the timestamp," Paige said, pointing at the bottom corner of the screen. 10:14 in the morning, exactly when the digital signature was created. I looked at Evan. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of color. The narrative of the innocent, protective father was dissolving pixel by pixel. Paige did not waste a second. She began typing furiously on her laptop. "I am filing an emergency ex parte motion right now. We are attaching the video, the IP logs, and the affidavit of forgery. We are asking for an immediate freeze on all marital assets and the reinstatement of your residency rights." Evan spun around, his eyes wild. He switched tactics instantly. He stopped pretending to be confused and started attacking my character, desperate to salvage his standing with Marcus. "You cannot listen to them," Evan said, his voice rising in pitch. "Lauren is unstable. She is obsessed with money. She has been manic for weeks, making up stories to confuse the children. If you freeze these accounts, you are hurting the kids, not me." I listened to him scream, but I felt strangely detached. I was already preparing my statement for the judge. I would not cry. I would not talk about my broken heart. I would talk about Noah's math tutor and Ellie's need for her nightlight. I would show the court that while Evan was busy orchestrating complex financial fraud, I was the one ensuring the children were fed, bathed, and loved. Ruth stepped forward, pulling one last sheet of paper from her briefcase. "It is interesting you mention hurting the kids. Evan, because I found this in the interbank shared alert system." She slapped the paper onto Marcus's desk. "You applied for this same bridge loan at City National 2 weeks ago," Ruth said, her voice ice cold. "They denied you. The risk officer flagged the application for potential fraud because the collateral valuation did not match the tax records. You knew this was illegal, so you came to a smaller branch where you thought you could charm the manager." Marcus looked at the rejection report. That was the final straw. He turned back to his keyboard and hit the enter key with a decisive snap. "I have just submitted a suspicious activity report to the Treasury Department," Marcus announced, his voice trembling but firm. "And I am freezing the loan funds immediately. The $350,000 is locked pending federal investigation. Evan looked as if he had been punched in the gut. That money was his lifeline. Without it, he could not pay the debts he was hiding. Suddenly, his phone began to ring. He pulled it out, and I saw the caller ID. It was his personal credit card company. "My card," Evan muttered, staring at the screen in horror. "Why are they calling me?" "Because once a bank files a fraud alert, it ripples through the system," Ruth said simply. "Your credit lines are shutting down. Evan, all of them." Desperate, Evan dialed a number and put it on speaker, his hands shaking. "Tessa." "Tessa, you need to tell them I had nothing to do with the signing. Tell them you just borrowed the papers." Tessa's voice filled the room, shrill and panicked. "I am not going to jail for you. Evan, you told me it was just a technicality. You said Lauren agreed to it." "Shut up," Evan yelled at the phone. "I have the texts. Tessa, I have the messages where you asked for a cut of the loan proceeds if I go down. You are coming with me. You promised I was safe." Tessa screamed back. I watched them tear each other apart, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of guilt and fear. Evan was shouting threats, Tessa was sobbing accusations, and Marcus was on his landline calling security. I stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. I looked at Evan, red-faced and terrified, stripping away his own dignity with every word he shouted. The trap had worked. The mask was gone. But I knew this was not the end. The bank was just the holding cell. The real judgment would happen in the courtroom, and I was ready to close the door on him forever. The emergency hearing was not the dramatic, shouting spectacle I had seen in movies. It was quiet, clinical, and devastatingly fast. The judge sat high on the bench, flipping through the stack of evidence Paige had submitted. He looked at the IP logs, the security photos of Tessa and Evan entering the print room, and the affidavit from the bank. The truth did not need to be screamed because the documents screamed for it. Evan stood at the defendant's table, his hands gripping the wood so hard his knuckles turned white. He tried one last time to play the role of the martyr. "Your Honor," Evan said, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. "I did this for the children. I was trying to secure their future. Lauren is... She is not capable of understanding complex financial structures right now." The judge did not even look up from the papers. Paige stood up, calm and lethal. "Your Honor," Paige said, "Mr. Rourke claims he acted for the children, yet he used a forged signature, a fake email address created on his office server, and the mobile device of a known accomplice to strip the equity from the family home. That is not financial structuring. That is grand larceny." The judge closed the file. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "Order granted," the judge said, his voice bored but firm. "Possession of the marital residence is returned to Ms. Kessler immediately. Mr. Rourke is restrained from coming within 500 feet of the property. And given the evidence of forgery, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for a criminal investigation." Evan looked as if he had been slapped. He opened his mouth to argue, perhaps to claim he still had the loan approval, but the courtroom doors opened. Marcus Hale walked in. He looked tired and pale. He handed a single sheet of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "The bank has permanently frozen the application," Marcus said, his voice devoid of its usual slick confidence. "We have flagged the file for federal review. There is no money coming, Mr. Rourke." Evan sank into his chair as if the strings holding him up had been cut. He looked like a man gasping for oxygen. The $350,000 he had counted on to save himself had vanished, and with it, his last escape route. 10 minutes later, I met him in the hallway. He was alone. His lawyer was already on the phone, likely discussing how to avoid jail time. Evan looked at me, his eyes hollow. "You destroyed everything," he whispered. "Are you happy?" I stopped and looked at him. I did not feel the urge to yell. I did not feel the need to cry. I felt lighter than I had in years. You threw your own children out into the rain to force me into silence, I said softly. You thought I was just a tired mother who would give up. You forgot that I am the one who knows how to read the trails you leave behind. I walked away, leaving him standing in the cold, fluorescent light of the courthouse hallway. That evening, I pulled into the driveway of our home. Noah and Ellie were in the back seat, clutching their stuffed animals. The house looked the same as it had yesterday, but it felt different. It was no longer a disputed asset. It was a fortress. Are we staying this time, Mom? Ellie asked, her voice small. Yes, baby, I said, turning to smile at her. We are staying. The next morning, I went back to Briar Hollow Trust one last time to sign the paperwork that would lock the children's trust into a protected status. Marcus Hale processed the forms himself. His hands shook slightly as he worked. I placed the silver card on the desk one last time. Marcus stared at it, his face turning pale again. He knew now that the card was not just plastic. It was a signal that the old guard, the people who built the system on integrity rather than greed, were watching him. Ruth stood beside me, watching him type. When we walked out into the sunlight, she took the card back and slipped it into her purse. That card is not magic, Lauren, Ruth said, putting on her sunglasses. It does not change the past. It just forces them to speak the truth when they would rather lie. I nodded. I understood now. Power was not about who yelled the loudest or who had the most expensive lawyer. Power was simply the ability to open the right doors and let the light in. Evan Rourke left the marriage with nothing. He had no home, no loan, and no reputation. The story of the good father was dead, buried under a mountain of official court records. I unlocked the front door of my house and ushered my children inside. I turned the deadbolt, hearing the heavy click of steel sliding into place. It was the sound of finality. Mom, Noah asked from the kitchen, is the house ours now? I looked at him, then at the solid walls around us. Yes, I said. From now on, our home is not a place someone allows us to live in. It is the place where the truth protects us. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we were safe. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Mia Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment below with your city or country and share your thoughts on Lauren's victory. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.